Hey guys, let's get more news about Steelers, but first, don't forget to subscribe and leave your like. Broncos could draw Russell Wilson, Steelers if they can make the playoffs. The Denver Broncos have not been to the playoffs since the 2015-16 season when they won Super Bowl 50. It's the second longest playoff drought in the NFL, currently behind only the New York Jets, and the Broncos would obviously love to see their first postseason action in nearly a decade, considering they are in the midst of rebuilding and reloading the roster. Especially considering the fact that the Broncos are also eating the majority of Russell Wilson's whopping $85 million in dead salary cap money this year, $53 million in 2024, $32 million in 2025. If the Broncos could make the playoffs with the amount of dead cap they currently are dealing with, it would be a massive testament to the coaching of Sean Payton and his staff. And if they do make the playoffs, there's a decent chance they would end up playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers and old pal Russell Wilson in the wild card round. Russell Wilson and the Pittsburgh Steelers actually came to Denver back in Week 2 of the season, but Wilson was still dealing with a calf issue at the time and obviously didn't get the chance to play. The Steelers won the game 13-6, and the Broncos were still struggling to get things off the ground offensively at the time. Now, over the last handful of weeks, not only have the Broncos been able to figure out some things offensively, but the Steelers have had a bit of an offensive surge as well, with Wilson in the starting lineup. It wasn't the most popular decision by Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin to name Russ the starter, but it certainly has paid dividends as they have scored 63 points in Russ's 2 starts this season. The Steelers were on a bye this past weekend, but they'll travel to Washington to take on the red-hot Commanders in Week 10, while the Broncos have a road trip against the Chiefs. If the season ended today, the Broncos would be the 7th seed in the AFC and the Steelers would be the 3rd seed. But they are currently only the 3rd seed because they have one less win than the Bills and have played one fewer game. The Bills have a game against the Chiefs in Week 11, so the Steelers could jump them relatively soon. Meanwhile, the Broncos are going to have to keep on winning just to keep pace in the wild card race. But whether the Broncos find a way to be the 6th or 7th team in the AFC, there is a decent chance their first-round opponent would be the Steelers. They'd be traveling to Pittsburgh to face off against Russell Wilson. And if that happened, it would be one of the most incredible storylines of the 2024 NFL season. 5 for Friday, Steelers just continue to build depth. The Steelers made a couple of trades this week to bolster their roster at the trade deadline, acquiring wide receiver Mike Williams and edge rusher Preston Smith. They might not have been the blockbuster deals for which many had hoped, but they are deals that make the Steelers a better team if just by improving the team's overall depth. And that has been a hallmark of general manager Omar Khan's tenure thus far. With the retirement of Ben Roethlisberger and the massive salary cap hit involved with having a franchise quarterback, the Steelers over the past couple of seasons have had much more available cap space with which to build a deep and complete roster. That has shown itself over the first half of this season, when the team has placed more than a dozen players on the reserve/injured list, including 3 offensive linemen, and still found ways to win games. And that doesn't even include both starting left guard Isaac Seumalo and starting center Zach Frazier, both missing multiple games each with injuries that didn't land them on IR. Despite those issues, the Steelers find themselves at 6-2 coming out of their bye week and positioned well in the AFC hierarchy. And they've done that because the team has approached player acquisition with the idea that they always want one more of whatever it is they are acquiring. Why select 2 offensive linemen in the draft when you can take 3 as they did this season with first-round pick Troy Fautanu, second-rounder Frazier, and fourth-round pick Mason McCormick? At the time, it seemed the selection of McCormick was something of a luxury pick with both Seumalo and James Daniels, a pair of veterans who had played well in 2023, firmly entrenched as the starters. But Seumalo missed 4 games to start the season and Daniels was placed on IR after 4 games with an Achilles tendon injury that forced McCormick into the starting lineup after veteran Nate Herbig was lost for the season in training camp to an injury. You just don't know what's going to happen at a given position over the course of a 7 or even 8-month NFL season. The Steelers found that out the hard way in 2023 when they were beset by injuries at the inside linebacker and safety positions. Leaving training camp, it appeared they had good depth at both. But when multiple injuries hit, it turned out that was not the case. So, in the offseason, the Steelers clearly made it a priority to acquire players who had starting experience to provide depth. The signings of players with lengthy resumes such as defensive lineman Dean Lowry, wide receiver Van Jefferson, tight end Michael Pruitt and running back/kick returner Cordarrelle Patterson are prime examples of this. None were splash signings. But all have played a role in the Steelers getting to 6-2. Williams and Smith fit into the same category. Yes, the Steelers were interested in perhaps adding another big-time weapon to their offense. They were reportedly interested in trading for San Francisco's Brandon Ayuk and a number of other wide receivers who have been traded this season. They're always interested in improving the roster, if the price is right. But they're not going to overpay for a player. And both Williams and Smith make the Steelers a deeper and more complete roster. 5 trades the Steelers should revisit when the offseason rolls around. Many might be sick and tired of hearing about trade rumors around the NFL. Like it or not, those rumors are probably here to stay with Omar Khan at the helm of the Steelers. He has constantly found ways to pull off trades both during the offseason and throughout the NFL schedule. He remains an aggressive general manager and could keep that trend going once the season concludes. Pittsburgh just added Mike Williams before the trade deadline, but that doesn't mean he will be a long-term answer. He will need to prove to the Steelers he is worth another contract after the year ends, but that doesn't mean he will get to that point. Pittsburgh has shown a ton of interest in receivers throughout the many months of trade speculation, and they could revisit some. Courtland Sutton, keep Courtland Sutton circled on the list of trade possibilities for the Steelers moving forward. There have been some tense moments between Sutton and the Broncos this year. Pittsburgh has been tied closely to Sutton in trade rumors since he played with Russell Wilson in Denver. If Wilson earns another contract with the black and gold, then Sutton will be a name to watch this offseason. DK Metcalf rumor has it some teams called Seattle about the potential availability of DK Metcalf before the trade deadline passed. One of those teams could have been the Steelers. Again, another Wilson connection here as he and Metcalf played together with the Seahawks. He would be a tremendous target for the black and gold if they wanted to make a long-term splash move at the receiver spot. Jacoby Myers. Even though the Steelers weren't able to land Devontae Adams from the Raiders, they could still go back into trade talks with Las Vegas. Jacoby Myers will have another year left on his contract this upcoming offseason, so he could be looking for a better environment to inflate his numbers before free agency. If the Raiders make him available, then he would be a cheaper option to fill a starting role. Adam Thielen. Talks never intensified between the Steelers and Panthers regarding an Adam Thielen trade before the deadline, but there were conversations. We now know that Pittsburgh had Thielen circled on their trade board before they landed Williams. If they have an opening pop back up this offseason, then it could make sense to check back with the Panthers about the trade cost for Thielen. Deebo Samuel. They went after Brandon Ayuk this past year, so the Steelers could always begin trade talks with the 49ers yet again this upcoming offseason. Deebo Samuel has not looked like the same player this season, but his role has increased since Ayuk went out with injury. If Samuel were to become available, then he would be a terrific fit into the Steelers' offense. His contract is expensive, but that could lessen his trade value. And you, fan? What do you think of the situation of DK Metcalf? Leave your opinion in the comments.